Good afternoon, everyone, as it is officially. So just a little bit about my background. I've been in the Autodesk channel for 20 years, primarily focused on manufacturing solutions. That's the inventor side of it. However, my background, my design degree is both in mechanical and in residential architecture. So I've played around with that side of it a bit. Played really, because I don't think I've ever been paid to do anything from a architectural side. But, I do have, the, I would say, notoriety maybe. When Revit was acquired by Autodesk, I jumped on that and started playing with it internally a bit. Probably 5 years ago or so, I spent an entire year building content, family content inside of Revit for various manufacturers to be able to provide them with content either on the Seek site or just on their own website so that you could download and use their content in your BIM design with regard to that. Actually, it was probably closer to 10 years ago, because about 4 years ago, I really got involved in our reality capture team, and now with the advent of the BLK 360, have kind of been pulled back in to that space, more for a focus on manufacturing, but certainly to really identify the use case, help sell the value proposition that goes along with it, which, believe it or not, from a scanning standpoint, the need for manufacturing and the need for the AEC market, in particular around building, is very similar. And I'm going to move through some of these slides pretty quickly because I know you guys have already seen a lot of this, but reality capture, right, is having the design process happen in context to the existing surrounding conditions, right? So these could be, any of these different types, right? 3D scanning photogrammetry, which would be with a drone taking a bunch of pictures or really taking pictures with anything. But aerial or mobile LIDAR, ground penetrating radar, sonar mapping, even tape measure, pencil, and paper is reality capture. All of this is really rooted in the fact that there is something there in existence. So just by a quick show of hands, does anybody in this room only do greenfield development? That's exactly what I thought, right? No one does, which means that there's something that already exists in place, and before we start our project, we have to do something to capture that reality, right? A lot of organizations that I work with, in particular manufacturing integrators like conveyor equipment, putting in machines next to something that's already there, they have to really identify what is already there before they start their projects. A lot of times they will send a team of people on site for weeks with maybe a laser tape measure, right? Some other way to go through and capture that data. Journal books, going through, sketching what things look like, annotating it. The challenge with that is it always seems like after we've spent that amount of money having those people out in the field, we get back to the office and we realize there's a whole bunch of stuff we missed. And we've got to send someone out again. Contrast that with a BLK 360, right, which right now prices out right around $20,000. You send one or two guys out for 1 or 2 days on site, pull the 3D cloud data of that site, bring that back to the office that everyone can now leverage and be able to work with. In the 3 minutes or so that this is running, it goes in and takes a full 360-degree picture, 150 megapixel dome image that you can go in and step into and really understand. in addition to the point cloud data, which allows you to go in and take your measurements, right? So that technology rooted in this really provides the ability to get started with the project a lot easier and allow us to go through and really be able to see that site as it is, so that when we need to tie into things, right, we have the ability to measure what that is, what's the diameter of that pipe that we're going to be connecting to, so that we make sure that we're speccing that properly. So what's a point cloud and what can I do with it? So probably two of the biggest buzzwords that really underlie the technology that go along with point clouds are accuracy and density, right? I can have something like a laser tape measure that is incredibly accurate, but I'm taking basically one shot at a time to measure that. So I don't really have any density. Depending on the technology that you invest in, that can also have an impact, right? Some of the scanners, may be pretty accurate. They have a high price tag, but you may not get the density that goes along with it. So I don't know how well this shows up on the screen, but any guesses on what this is? A room. Besides a point cloud, yes. Any more guesses? It is not this room, but thanks for playing. It is a ship. Which ship? Not the Enterprise. It's the torpedo room in the USS Hornet. But what this really emphasizes is that if I don't have the density in the point cloud to truly be able to identify what it is, that point cloud isn't that useful for me, right? So in selecting technology, in investing in this, we need to make sure that the data that we're getting from a point cloud standpoint is accurate enough for the needs that we have with regard to how we're interacting with it. That being said, right, I mentioned this comes at about a $20,000 price point. Prior to the introduction of this, from a Leica standpoint, we were dealing with, $100,000 scanner investment plus or minus $25,000, depending on what you were stepping into. That's a pretty big, steep price tag, long ROI with regard to it. This ROI is a heck of a lot quicker. It also is not as accurate, okay? But for a lot of the things that we're trying to do, we want to capture the existing space. We want to make sure that when we're hooking into it, we know information about it. But it's not like I'm doing a 20-mile stretch of roadway and I'm traversing along that to get the terrain data so that we know how much cut and fill we've got and all the rest of it, right? This is typically very useful for scanning, a room like this, scanning floors of a building, something like that, or even capturing the data as we're going through a construction project to be able to lay that information in and really know, what we were building off of as time went on. So really, the question becomes, what can I do with it, right? So informed design, that initial design created in context of all the surroundings, clash detection against existing elements. So the ability to overlay what I've designed into the point cloud and make sure that I've got enough clearance, I've got enough room to get the equipment in or out or whatever it is that I'm trying to interact with. Right? Validate, combine that as-built data with the original as-designed plans to make sure that it was actually built as it had been designed. Right? Verify retrofits and changes over time. Document the process. I mentioned the fact that if I'm routinely scanning a site, right, when we go in and put in the steel, and then we pour the concrete, and then we go in and start to, put in the exterior, and then we do the interior, right? The ability to build that all up and be able to overlay those point clouds so that we truly have a 3D model of what that new construction looks like. And then monitor, right? More from a facilities management standpoint, to be able to monitor over time, right? Any form and design movement. If we've got some issues with, the hillside sliding, or we've got, buckling on a retaining wall or something like that, the ability to go through and monitor the space that we have to see that, this, 2 feet up on this retaining wall is moving out 2 inches a year, right? We know we have some issues with regard to that. Some applicable industry uses, right? If we're talking about photogrammetry, aerial LIDAR, basically we're running a drone over that with a camera, we're picking it up. One of the challenges with photogrammetry is we can't see through foliage, right? So if that's important, then you may not want to choose that. Aerial LIDAR is not quite as accessible, I would say. It's a bit more expensive, but it can go through that foliage and not have as big of an issue. But we're basically flying a site and trying to pick up the information that goes along with it. Existing conditions for retrofit, being able to capture that existing space, leverage that information and make some good design decisions with regard to how we're dropping it in there, right? This is an example of taking that 3D model and dropping it in. We know what areas we're going to have to demo or connect into, but the ability to go through and check that cloud to make sure that, again, the design we're dropping in isn't going to have connection issues, isn't going to have location or clash issues with regard to that. This is, kind of similar to the photogrammetry one, but you can actually see those rectangles on top. That is each location where that drone took a picture. One of the key things to keep in mind with photogrammetry is it's all calculated, nothing is measured, right? It's just taking all those pictures, it knows where the drone is relative to the other pictures, and it's able to kind of calculate back to where that shows up in the different pictures with regard to where it is. This is very useful in going in and doing, again, volume calculations, right? Mines use this type of stuff. Anybody handling bulk materials has the ability to go through and fly that pile, pull it back, put it in, create the mesh of it, and then do a volume calc of that pretty quickly, pretty easily. Of course, construction observation and validation, again, making sure that what is being as built is as designed and being able to kind of monitor that progress. And I talked about the construction documentation, laying in the steel, scanning it, dropping concrete, scanning it, exterior, interior, all the way up through. From a construction documentation standpoint, this is actually our office in Omaha. What they did right before they moved in, they scanned it a little bit, and then went in and did an elevation analysis. There's about a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch variant between levels in here, the gradients on this. What you'll notice is, at the columns, we're at kind of the expected level. We've got some dipping between columns, right? And then, of course, the other columns are over here, so we've kind of got that, flat spot. Now, this really isn't important at all for an office space. Right? We don't really care if there's a 1/2 an inch drop over 20 feet or something like that with regard to where the floor dips. But if we've got industries where it's much more important to have a particular slope or no slope at all, depending on what it is, the ability to go through and analyze that geometry and understand that we are not truly flat. Right? In reality, there is some bowing to the wall, right? Or there is some slope to the way the floor was laid. Can be pretty important when we're going in and laying equipment in afterward. Of course, safety and access limitations is also important, right? If I don't have the ability to get into the site, both of these scans were done, the substation in particular, outside the fence, right? The ability to go through and collect that data without actually having to go into a hazardous environment. This morning we were talking to the city of Seattle. One of the issues they've got is when they go into manholes, they've got to give a certain amount of time for those to vent, right? Instead, they can go in, open up the manhole, drop this in upside down into the vault, do a couple quick scans, pick up that data. They don't ever have to put a personnel in danger with regard to that if it didn't vent like it was supposed to. So there's a lot of uses with regard to that to be able to get accurate information. And be much more safer for the personnel that we have out there on site. So what does this mean as far as workflows go? Right? Point clouds can be used in their native format, meaning I can just go in, pull those in, publish this out to technology like a TrueView, which actually kicks it out to a website. I can make it public. I can allow anybody to browse that 3D cloud, point cloud, to see what the existing geometry looks like and be able to work with it. I can use that point cloud data to be modeled into solid geometry objects. This is particularly useful when we're actually tracking into the things that we're connecting up to, or geometry that we may need to demo, right? Which probably leads into this one, which is definitely an arguable point, right? Being able to model that into a BIM deliverable. About the only valid argument that I've heard so far is that if I truly have to have a documentation of what am I about to demo, right? I've got demo construction documents, and then I've got the new build that I'm going to be putting in there. If it is important to show that, as a demo phase, then I may need to go through and trace over that point cloud data, as opposed to going through and working with it some other way. As far as these workflows go, what we're going to take a look at after Clark has had a chance to kind of run through some of the stuff that he has found, is how do we take that point cloud data into Revit and kind of interact with it and see the information that we need to see without having to go through and redraw it. So I think with that, I'll come back to our solutions. I'm going to turn this over to Clark, and bear with us as we are going through the process of swapping out machines.
Okay, so going into this, I was going to show you guys a whiz-bang utilization of the point cloud in a BIM-enabled project. But as I started working through all of my slides and information, I started to realize that I want to turn you guys into consumers of point cloud data. I think a lot of us in this room have probably been on a project where we were provided a point cloud, either by a service provider, or it might have been an as-built scan of a facility. But I have to ask, how many of you who've received a model feel like you actually were able to utilize the point cloud to what you were expecting to utilize it for? So, a few of you. How many of you were disappointed by what you could do with your point cloud? I think a lot of people, because it really, until probably the past couple of years, it's been really difficult to manipulate the data, utilize the data. Really, I think it was Revit 2016 or 17 that allowed the recap file to be linked in as a linked model. But now everybody is going to get access to the AEC industry collection. And if you're not there, I'm not trying to sell you guys, but if you're not there, I think Autodesk is forcing everybody to go to that. And the benefit there is obviously you get the whole suite of Autodesk tools, one of which is Recap, which up until the industry collection you had to purchase separately, unless you buy a BLK. I know when we purchased this, they threw it in. So again, knowing that many of you have probably tried to utilize the model and haven't known what to do, again, I want to turn you into consumers. I want to show you what registration looks like in Recap Mobile and Recap Desktop. Recap Mobile is actually an iPad application that is used to control the BLK. And then I want to show you guys a little methodology in how to align your point cloud with a Revit model. I think that usually is the biggest stumbling block is, nowadays there's interoperable point cloud formats like E57, right? And so we can pull that into any software, but usually point cloud coordinates are never the same as your model coordinates. So usually you have to do one of two things, which is either pay your service provider to manipulate the data. They know how valuable that is, and they definitely recoup the value in that and ask for that. And then, so beyond that, I also want to show you guys how to share and then collaborate in point clouds. So not everybody's a BIM user, not everybody's going to have Revit where they can link it in, not everybody's going to have recap. Sure, you could create, you know, an NWD file that somebody could pull into Navisworks Viewer or Freedom and take a look at, but there's easier methods without having to install that. And then showing you how to open a recap file in Revit. I don't know, I might skip over that one depending on how much time I have. And then I'll show you some Navisworks settings that are important to know. I know that tends to be a big stumbling block, not only in how do you publish your NWD to share, but also file size and a few other things that end up being stumbling blocks there. And then I'm going to show you some BLK 360 settings, just based on my experience. We got this a couple of months ago, and it's been trial by fire. You know, we've got a project which I'm going to talk about that I've been applying it to real-time coordination, you know, which is going on. We have a meeting tomorrow, you know, for MEP coordination. So show you some of those things that I've learned in the settings that kind of help facilitate sharing of data. And yeah, first-timer lessons learned. And then just a real quick, you know, overview in recap, you know, how you can do a quick little floor flatness. So hopefully when you guys leave the room today, you'll know how to open recap, how to import a point cloud, how to manipulate that data, and then use the data in recap without having, you can do that in Revit, but you need to have a third-party tool, which is a whole nother presentation that I could give. So with that, basically the value case for this was a project here in Seattle called Lincoln High School. Built in 1906, it is currently undergoing a renovation under a GCCM contract, expected to open in fall of 2019. So some credits to the construction and design team on that. Value prop, why did we get this? You know, we've paid money to service providers in the past. They do great jobs. Sometimes, to be honest, the quality they provide us is actually better than what this device can provide. However, I'm going to show you guys that the data you get out of this is just as valuable. No need to pay, you know, a heck of a lot more money to get a higher resolution scan. And then, like I said, sometimes if you want them to align the model with your CAD file or your Revit model, you end up paying more money. So now we can do it. We can do it in-house. We have the tools. Cost is the cost of entry is now pretty low. $20,000 is a fifth of, you know, what it has been for really the past, you know, 20 years. We also have an in-house surveyor who's, you know, he's an expert in Revit, understands Autodesk point layout, knows how to utilize some of the data. So we're kind of at a point where, you know, it's not just me, you know, I have somebody else I can rely upon. And then beyond that, software interoperability, you know, so now we have Revit and AutoCAD, we can link in point clouds, and we can actually consume that data within our project, within our designs, and use that to benefit the project. And then again, beyond that, the ability to analyze the data that's in there is evolving every day. You know, it's like I'm going to show you, pretty easy to run a quick visual floor flatness check, getting deviation reporting, integrating that into clash detection, and now we're starting to see some real progress in feature recognition, where, you know, tools, not necessarily recap, but other tools on the market can recognize features within the point cloud and you know, not necessarily model for you, but at least have some reference elements inside. So I kind of asked some of these questions. You know, how many of you have used Recap in the room? It's quite a few. All right, awesome. And then, yeah, so I kind of asked the rest of these, so we'll move on. So into the BLK, this guy here. I've probably scanned Lincoln High School. I've probably got 150 scans. It only needs about 35, 36 scans at the end of the day, but I have gone back there at least 3 or 4 times based on the results of what I get out of this scanner. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of these settings that might help you guys, while you're in the field, understand what you can do to make sure you only need to capture that data one time. So first thing is kind of talking about how, so this is referred to, I think the terminology I've been hearing is called imaging class. So this is not a scanner you can necessarily rely on for, you know, for measuring. I know they use the I think it's the P40 to, for NASA, they check the space shuttle stations or the space shuttle launch pads, and they see, you know, how much the structure moves on each launch. And they're looking at things down to like a 64th of an inch, maybe even higher tolerance than that. BLK is not going to provide you those kind of tolerances. However, for imaging, you know, or capturing, you know, an as-built condition, this is a great tool. None of us really need anything beyond a 16th of an inch, right? So with that, kind of talking about some of the settings, you can kind of see it's got a low, medium, and high setting for the scans. Your low resolution measurement is 20 millimeters, or every 20 millimeters with about 0.8 inch deviation. So not super reliable if you want to go out and just get a quick capture or something. Low resolution works okay. Obviously not something you want to rely on for actual measurements there. I generally scan in the medium resolution, and I think that's kind of just the out-of-the-box setting. That one is about 1 measurement every 10 millimeters with 0.4 inch deviation. And then the high resolution, that takes about 4 minutes to complete a scan. And that one, you know, your file size ends up being so large that the data transfer ends up being really difficult. So what I'm doing right now is actually turning on a high resolution scan just to give you guys an idea of, you know, how long it takes. So yeah, that's going to scan while I'm talking. You can see there's a few other scanning. I'll get into what happens when people walk by. So as you can see here, really one of the biggest things to pay attention to here is number one, the file size or data size. You know, if every scan you're scanning 30 times is a gigabyte, not only will your data transfer be difficult, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time post-processing and getting that data to a size that you can share with other people, either people using Revit, Navisworks, what have you. So yeah, that's one of the things that I've kind of been playing around with. One thing to note, I didn't mention here, is that if you get a BLK, and if you're scanning and you decide one area you want to do medium resolution, and then your next scan you want to do a high resolution, auto registration ends up being very confused by the difference in point numbers. So that's one thing. That's one of the reasons I've had to go back and rescan, because, you know, I'd go down the corridors and I'd set it on high because that's really what we were concerned about. And then as I started breaking out into rooms just to save time and everything, I would put it in low resolution. And when I came back, it thought that it had registered in Recap Mobile, but when I pulled it into the desktop, it got really confused. So I had to do a lot of research and found out that that is not recommended by Autodesk or Leica. Camera settings. So some things to watch out for, on this particular project, there were some areas, obviously we've gone in, we've demoed, there's no lighting, so there's temp lighting, so there's these, large temp lighting that's in the room, and if I'm having to scan near that temp lighting, you can kind of see, this isn't an example of temp lighting, but this is an oversaturated image from too much sun, but you kind of get the idea here. White and reflective surfaces do not go very well with this device or with Recap. So I kind of had to walk around the project with just kind of I went around and found another temp light that I could adjust, and I literally carried it around with me, and when rooms were too dark, I would try to figure out a good location where I could light up the room and still see everything, yet not impede the exposure of the image. So yeah, that was kind of down on first floor. It literally was pitch black. And so what I started to figure out is getting into exposure settings. I'm not a camera guy, I'm a point and shoot guy, that's why I've got a BLK. So I kind of had to start learning about, exposure and turning it off auto. I'm used to that. My point and shoot, I just turn it on auto and, it does good enough for me. But this is a situation where it ended up actually being really valuable, getting in there and being able to change the shutter speed to accommodate darker rooms or rooms that had lots of windows and were bringing in lots of sunlight. When we first got this device, it did not have HDR images. There was a firmware update in December, so one question I know I didn't ask anybody, does anyone have a BLK in the room? No, okay. If you received one of the early BLKs, yeah, they were pretty limited in functionality, so a lot of people haven't been notified that there was a firmware update, so you can update the firmware and that basically activates the HDR imaging. HDR does kind of improve, if you're in a dark room, it will tend to pick up a little more lighting. I'm not going to try to speak too intelligently to what HDR is, but I did find that when I turned it on, the images turned out much better. Although I did find that its transfer time to the iPad increased quite a bit. And I'll kind of show you guys how that works, but you can see right now I'm controlling the BLK wirelessly through the iPad, and it's sending the data real time to the iPad. So you can imagine the HDR image, the point cloud, everything being processed ends up, that time increases. So that's why I kind of like the medium resolution. I usually turn HDR off if I don't need it. That way I can get access to the data in Recap Mobile as fast as possible. So your scanning environment. So lessons learned. First scan should always be as level as possible. There is a slight, I guess, they call it a compensator inside of it. It's nothing like what is in some of the bigger scanners or on total stations. So they recommend making your first scan as flat as possible. That also is the scan that Recap Mobile kind of utilizes to auto-register the rest of the scans and start relating, what axis it's on. Another thing is I was out scanning during demolition, and there was jackhammers, there were, saw cutting holes. I mean, the slab was vibrating while I was out there. And I kind of knew that might affect the results, but I couldn't find a good image to put on the screen. I wish I could have. If you can imagine taking a coin, tossing it in the pond, and you see the ripples, that's exactly what you end up with. And so then when you get into Recap Desktop and you start trying to register things, nothing works. Obviously, then your floor flatness and trying to analyze some of that is pretty much useless. So that is definitely a lesson learned. People were walking around the job site. I mean, there was, probably 50 guys in that building while I was scanning. And so this device, unlike some of its more expensive older brother and sister, it does not ignore things like rain, dust, people. They get in there, and what ends up happening is if you have to manually register and you have point, I'll show you alignment a little later, but basically if I'm trying to reference, this wall or a point on this wall, and somebody had walked between the scanner and that wall, when I go to click on it and try to pull two point clouds together, they're not going to match, because rather than being over there, the point cloud will be, or there'll be a point wherever somebody had walked by. So what I ended up doing was going out to the job site on the weekend or after 4:30, and it was much smoother of a process and higher quality output. Another thing to keep in mind is materials. So there was lots of water on the slab. They were removing plumbing. They were, spraying for dust, all sorts of stuff. So there would be puddles, and those puddles that are reflective become holes in your model. And then again, that starts to affect your ability to register and utilize the data. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another is white. You can kind of see in this image on the right, that's all that is just a white. It's not reflective. It's just a white paint on a wall. Does not like that. Those points did not show up in the model. It kind of recap just kind of ignores that data. If it does pull the data in, it ends up kind of being pretty much useless. Reflective surfaces, it does not agree with well. I think other devices do okay, but this one does not. And then windows, as you could kind of see from back here, end up, you need to pay attention. That's where the exposure settings really come in, is if you're in a room with lots of natural light. The auto setting is not as good as your point and shoot or your iPhone or Galaxy phone. So it is very sensitive to windows. Okay, so recap mobile. I'm going to kind of show you guys a little bit of this, but one of the benefits behind recap mobile is I'm scanning real time, and I did a scan when I first walked in, and I already have access to that data. I can see it. I can double check that it's not overexposed. I can share these images, but the other part of this is it's registering the two different, so I have 2 point clouds. One's actually transferring still because I put it on the high setting, but as soon as that one fully transfers, Recap Mobile is going to register those 2 point clouds together, and it's either going to auto-register or tell me to manually register, which I'll get into some of those items later. But the benefit here is that while that's scanning, every 3 minutes that it's over there scanning, I can be going through 2 scans prior and registering that data. I think the goal of this workflow is that by the time I get back to the office, all that data is in Recap Mobile, registered, ready to be transferred to the desktop, where it's refined a little bit, but we're talking, a 20-minute registration and index process to the point where then you can start consuming the data that you just acquired. So I think that's the biggest benefit, right, at least out of this particular device and this workflow. I think more and more we're going to see more and more scanners like this. We're going to see, I think, a big evolution in these devices, and I think a lot of them are going to run on this type of workflow because that saves a lot of the time. When you pay a service provider to go scan something, the scanning portion of it is usually 50%, and the other 50% is post-processing. Well, now you're post-processing in real time on the job site while you still have access to all the elements in the room and understand what's going on and have a better idea of how to pull it together in context. So this is a quick example of a scan capture and how auto registration works. So I'm in Recap Mobile, starting a new project. You're going to see this is a beginner mistake. it needs to link via Wi-Fi. So you'll see me go in here, connect to the device, go back to recap, kind of plays around. This is one of the things you start to get used to when you use this device. And there it is. All right, now it's connected. I just hit scan, and what it's using is the scan settings that I talked about earlier, the low, medium, high. Same with the photo settings. Those are set for that particular scan. And it's going to go through the scan, and then it's going to go and process. So about 3 minutes later, it processes the data, and then it pulls it in. Boom, you're done. All right, so that's what it looks like through your first scan. All right, and then I fast forwarded to the second scan. It's going to pause that right there. So the first scan, like I said, is kind of your base scan. That's why it needs to be level. And so now my second scan that I have pulled in, a recap is looking for common features, okay? And it's got an algorithm in there that aligns the two different models. So you can imagine if your first scan was tilted, when it pulls the second one in, it's going to be tilted as well. So that's why we want to be kind of on a flat surface. So then when it pulls them together, you're at least close to level. I think that's one of the biggest issues a lot of people have. If you go into recap forums, people are like, why is my scan data rotated? You know, I hate this thing. And that's just one of the intricacies of it. So what you can see is the way auto registration works is it gives you a little image, and in blue is the previous scan, and in orange is my new scan. And it kind of lets you look at it and say, okay, does that make sense? Does that look good? And then a way to actually, more than visually, know what's going on. It gives you a couple of data points. And so one is overlap, one's balance, and points within 6 millimeters. Let's see here. Actually, I'm going to go back. I think on another slide, I'm going to actually explain what those are, so I'll get into them in more detail. So let's kind of continue this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit that merge scan right there. Boom, now it pulls the two together. For some reason, when I was doing screen capture, it just kept showing them as black screens, so then I had to go back in. Now I click on it. Oh, I auto-registered. Never mind. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of the auto-registration process. So again, you get this, you click merge scan, and based on what you're looking at there, that alignment in that image is what you're going to get, all right? So as you continue down the process, you keep getting these registration results. They're either going to be in the green, so you can kind of see it's a target, and you want at least 2 of them to be green, and 1 of them can be yellow. When I explain what these mean, it'll make more sense as to which one you want to pay attention to. Okay. So, this here, so this is an example of, I think I'm showing off some manual registration. So it's doing that thing where it makes my black screen. I'm going to go back, open it again. So, actually, let me pause that and go right here. So, this is one of the little intricacies that you start picking up on in the device. This orange, the new scan that it's trying to register against the existing scans, that doesn't belong there. That's the corridor that goes over here. So for some reason, it picked up some points over here and wants to align. That's where its auto alignment wants to go. I don't want it to go there, okay? So what I do is there is a button. It's a little grayed out, but it says, rather than merge scan, it says manual registration. So I'm going to kind of show you guys real quick what that looks like. So you get the split screen view between your existing scans on the top here, and then this is the scan that I want to pull into the existing data. If I back that up a little bit, you'll see that I actually changed scans. So what it does is this one that says Lincoln 3.4, that was the last scan. So that is the scan that it'll default to trying to align with my newest scan, right? The one that I just transferred in. But sometimes, depending on your process and the building and how the building's laid out, you might need to try and register your current data set against 4 scans ago. And so what you're able to do up here in recap is select one of those previous scans that has reference data that you can reference to. So that's kind of what you see me doing there. So now I'm going to go through this, change to a scan that has what I'm looking for. And so what I've got there is Brad, our surveyor, has laid out targets throughout the project, right? And so all of those targets, they all have a coordinate and an elevation. And that's important because by having that data already inside the building, I can turn those into what are called survey points and easily align the model with your design data, right? You just need whatever the difference between your points are. But in this particular case, I'm actually using these targets as manual registration points. So they're an easy visual reference between scans. And so let's kind of continue, and you'll see me click on the screen. It's kind of faint, but there's a little green dot there, and then I'm going to match the little green dot up here. And I'm going to find another target. I'm kind of looking around. What's some reference data that I can use? Yeah. Exactly, and you can do that. So I'm showing this as an example just because that was an easy way to make this perform well. But yes, at the same time, it does actually pretty well. You'll see that as I go through, actually I don't use targets for all. So you need 3 reference points between your 2 different scans for the alignment to work. So I had 2 targets in view between those 2 different scans, and then I look around like what's something that I can find? Oh, look at that hole. That's a good reference point. So I find that hole in both scans. And then what I get in this lower left is results. So I'll get into what some of those registration results mean, but what I found is that sometimes just barely touching that point and moving it to the left or right a little will make those go from red to green. Don't know why, but it's one of the things you start picking up on. So we'll kind of, what's that? 10 minutes, okay. So, yeah, that's real quick on using Recap to register, auto registration and manual registration. It's pretty easy to do. Recap desktop, let's see here, you've got additional functionality. Doesn't perform well when you're trying to import more than 30 scans per project. What I'm trying to, yeah, here we go. Okay, so what happens is when I've gone through that process, I've auto-registered or manually registered all my data. I have it on the iPad, right? I get back to the office, that data's right here. So I have all that scan data here. I still have to plug it into my computer. I've got to have Recap Desktop. And then what Recap Desktop does is it sucks the data off pretty quickly, and then it refines that data, and it might find some scans that it doesn't like, and it starts giving you the same registration results in Recap Desktop and lets you kind of refine how those point clouds are aligned. You'll see red. You don't want red. Red's just saying that it can't find any of these 3 data points that can merge together. Yellow is okay, but preferred is getting green, the green color. All right, so here's what does all this mean. So, this overlap is the percentage of common features. You're not always going to have a lot of overlap. Depending on if you're in a doorway or you're inside another room, but you've got enough visibility into the other room that it's going to capture enough balance and points, you can usually be all right. So that's the one that I tend to allow flexibility on. Balance tells it how many common features. Okay, so overlap is throughout the project. Yeah, sorry about that. So that is common features throughout your project. Then balance is common features within the two different scans, right? So you definitely want your balance to be good because you want the scan you're trying to register against have as many common features with the new data you're pulling in. And then points, quick run through on what points are, but for sake of time, I'll get past that. Recap desktop, I didn't really show you guys too much here because it's exactly the same as on the mobile device. You pick 3 common points, and it uses its algorithms, pulls them together. It does tend to be a little easier when you have a mouse and a bigger screen, but that's why you get the 12.9-inch iPad. It's a little easier to view. A little more on Recap Desktop. So again, I want to make you guys consumers of the data. Once you have access to Recap Desktop, you can pretty much pull in a point cloud produced from just about any total station and directly and register it in Recap. Or if there's a point cloud provided to you, it reads all the common, interoperable formats. Right now, I think it's really E57 is what people are using to share. You can pull that in and both import it or export it. So now if you've got scan data, you've registered it, and you want to share it out to somebody else, you can export out to E57, and then they can have that native cloud format. Aligning the point cloud with a BIM model. This is just kind of a quick example. I turned some of the scans off and left some of the scans on, just showing the data aligned with the BIM model. So a quick run through on how I utilize this is Brad was out, he used APL. We have data points throughout the model. Those targets have coordinates. So using Autodesk point layout, you can have all that data real time inside your Revit model. And I can click on them and I can get the model coordinate of that location, not the survey coordinate. I can get the model coordinate, right? And then I can apply that XYZ. Now, easting is your X, northing is your Y. So when you're in Recap, you can kind of see the lower right here, I've got control points. So in Recap Desktop, I went through and applied control points to these target locations with my known model coordinates. That is how you get that. It's really not all that difficult other than being able to have a coordinate in real time or an element that's out in reality that you can go into your model. It doesn't have to be a point through APL. It could be, center of a column. You can click on that center of a column in your Revit model, get those coordinates, apply that through Recap as survey points, and voila. Okay, so you have a point cloud, pulled it in, you've aligned it. Now what can you do? Well, there's actually a lot. Recap is really not an obvious tool. It looks actually really limited in functionality, but it actually has a decent amount, which I've started to realize over time. So real quick, once you have it, you can easily run a floor flatness analysis, wall plumb, and then, obviously, as we were speaking about earlier, you can as-built, location of in-slab elements, pre-pour, like your post-tension, embeds, penetrations, all of that data will be recorded not only in a 360 photo, but then also in your point cloud. You can store that data, and you can always return back to it. From there, Recap also has meshing abilities. I tested that a couple of times, and I don't like it. But it is kind of a cool feature, and I think as that evolves, we'll start seeing some interesting stuff. It sounds like you guys had a previous presentation on meshing point cloud data. I thought I heard that earlier, maybe not. Either way, it's inside of Recap, there is a meshing tool, and it'll send whatever you've scanned to the cloud, process it, and it comes back. But it's not as accurate as the point cloud. And then, yeah, we can slice and overlay an NWD. So let's kind of go into that. So this is this is inside of Recap. So how many of you know what an NWD file is? A few of you. So NWD is a Navisworks export. So again, if you get the AEC collection at some point, you'll probably have access to Navisworks. You can open Revit models, you can open CAD files, you can open any CAD 3D format inside of it. So once you have gone through, you've aligned all your data, you can then export into Navisworks, and now you can pull that Navisworks model into reality. I will show you guys real quick what the point cloud looks like in Navisworks, and obviously in Navis, the focus on fidelity is in the 3D elements, not in the point cloud. In Recap, the fidelity is kind of focused on the reality capture of the point cloud and the data, not so much the model. So there's not a lot of manipulating you can do with the model, but you can at least superimpose proposed conditions inside your reality model. So this is an example of Lincoln with our MEP model integrated. So just kind of real quick, this is what it looks like when you're in Recap. You click on one of your spheres, that's a scan sphere. You go into what's called Real View mode. Inside of Real View, I already had the Navisworks model pulled in, but it's in the Real View mode that you actually see the data. You don't see it in the 3D mode. I hope they change that. I hope they improve that at some point. But yeah, this is a great feature. Let's see, I think, did I show it? Yeah, actually, let's go back. So you can see I go up to the upper left. There's a little button here, beta. You click on that, and that's how you attach your Navisworks model. But again, your Navisworks model needs to be aligned with the point cloud for that to work. Okay, let's see here. So this is kind of a real quick demo. I show a couple of things. I call it floor flatness, but there's some elements here that I think are really useful to everyone for consuming data. So the first one, the first button I clicked here, let's pause that. The lower left is the limits box. That's kind of a section box, same as a section box in Revit, and that lets me kind of pull the data down to what I want to see. So in this case, I just want to see the floor. So I'm going to real quickly skip ahead. So I pulled that section box down. What you need to do in this case is your coordinates are not the same as the origin in Recap. So everyone has access to that update origin. That's not going to change the location of your model. All that's going to do is change its internal origin. So what I'm doing here is setting an internal origin of the top of floor elevation, right? So I've done that there. That's my top of floor. Looks good. And I go through, and this colors button lets you come in, and there's different ways to analyze colors. So there's intensity, elevation, scan location. I want elevation because I want to see differences in the elevation from where I set my origin, okay? Once I do that, the little scale on the left side is how I need to manipulate that so that I can analyze just those points. So my origin should be 0, right? So whatever I clicked on there is going to be 0. So I'm going to change my range. So there's a max and a minimum. Let me kind of skip ahead here. So I start playing around with the range. You can see, voila, there is my floor flatness. I mean, so I didn't need to pull it into Revit and APL. I didn't need to do any of that. I quickly scanned it and got the data. And now I can take a screenshot, send it off. All right, so I'm going to try and quickly wrap this up. So sharing with non-BIM users, that's another thing. So you get the data, you've got it in your model. Not everybody's got Revit. You want to be able to share it. Recap web. There's a publish button in Revit, or I'm sorry, in Recap. This is kind of what it looks like. It sends everybody to or it sends whoever you've emailed this to this web page, and they get access not to the 3D point cloud, but they still get the real view, as they call it. So you can come in and people can snap dimensions. You can save the dimensions for everyone else and share, or you can just use it for reference. So our superintendents and everyone on the field love this. They're able to utilize this and quickly take some measurements, check shop drawings and the such. And then real quick, collaboration, publish an NWD, so the publish tool in Revit, or I'm sorry, in Navisworks. Click on that and you need to turn on embed, recap, and texture data. Now you have an NWD that you can share. And then there's also reader settings. You guys could probably find this when we share the presentation to everyone, but these are just some good to know tips and tricks inside of Navisworks. Data management. I'll skip over that one for now. Just here's some lessons learned that you guys can kind of take a look at if you're interested in becoming a new scanner. Final thoughts. I don't believe in point clouds, or I believe in them as linked to reference data, do not model. BLK is an imaging class scanner, not a survey class scanner, so don't use it for layout data. You get recap now provided with all your data, so if you do go buy a BLK, I would actually do it with Register 360. I already went through the process of selling this device at its price, and so some of the other software that's out there that is a little stronger, now that's a whole nother sell, and it's kind of like, well, why did we buy this then? So I highly recommend that. And then real quick, at Lydig, there's 27 of us. We're going to all climb Mount Baker and support cancer research. So if you guys have ever been touched by cancer, we'd love for you to partner with us and help us climb. So that's what I had. Thanks for having me.